Daniel Carter stood on the edge of the Mapo Bridge, and for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't afraid of falling. The Han River moved black beneath him, swallowing every light from the city that had once made him believe in second chances. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the weight of a decision he had already made. His phone sat heavy in his palm, screen glowing with a message he had typed but never sent. He deleted it. Then he typed it again. Then he deleted it a second time. He whispered the only words that felt true anymore. "I'm sorry, Mom." The wind pulled at his jacket. Below him, Seoul glittered like it didn't know a man was standing at its edge, deciding whether he still belonged to the world. Daniel closed his eyes. He leaned forward, just slightly, just enough to feel the pull of gravity agree with him. Then his phone rang. The sound cut through the night like a slap. Daniel flinched, nearly losing his footing. He looked down at the screen, ready to silence it, ready to let it go to voicemail like every other call he'd ignored for weeks. But the name froze him. Governor Han Tae-jun. Daniel hadn't spoken to the governor in months. Not since the job had gone cold. Not since the man had started treating him like a liability instead of the private chef who once fed his family every Sunday. There was no reason for him to be calling. Not now. Not at 11 at night. Daniel answered. There was no greeting. No pleasantries. Just a voice stretched thin with panic. A voice Daniel had never heard the governor use before. "Daniel." A breath, ragged and broken. "My daughter has been kidnapped." The words didn't make sense at first. Daniel's mind was still half on the ledge, still half in the water below. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "Seo-yeon," the governor said, and this time his voice cracked completely. "She's gone. Someone took her." Daniel stepped back from the railing without realizing he'd done it. His feet found solid concrete. His heart, which minutes ago had felt like it was already stopping, now pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. "When?" Daniel finally managed. "When did this happen?" 2 hours ago. She left the university. Her driver was found unconscious. The cameras. The governor's voice broke off entirely, and for a moment there was only static, only the sound of a father unraveling. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "The kidnappers are asking for you. Specifically you, Daniel. They said if you don't come, they'll kill her." Daniel stood frozen on the bridge. The phone pressed so hard against his ear it hurt. Somewhere behind him, a car passed, headlights sweeping across the pavement and gone again. He thought about the girl he used to cook for, the girl who used to sit at the kitchen counter doing her homework while he taught her how to properly season kimchi jjigae, back when he still had a life worth living in. He thought about the necklace he'd given her the day her mother died. "Why me?" Daniel said quietly. "Why would they ask for me?" The governor didn't answer, and the silence on the other end of the line told Daniel something he didn't want to admit yet, that the governor didn't know either. Or worse, that he did. If you're watching this and you already feel your chest tightening, that's exactly where this story wants you. Because what happens to Daniel over the next 25 minutes will make you question everything you think you know about guilt, about fathers, and about the people we trust the most. Hit subscribe before you go any further, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Because trust me, you're going to want to be part of this conversation by the time it ends. 3 years earlier, Daniel Carter had everything. He'd arrived in Seoul as an unknown chef with nothing but a knife roll and a stubborn belief that Black American cooking and Korean flavor belonged on the same plate. Against every prediction, he'd been right. His restaurant, tucked into a narrow alley in Itaewon, became the kind of place people waited 2 hours for: smoked short-rib doenjang, cornbread with gochujang honey, a menu that felt like two histories finally speaking the same language. Reviewers called him a visionary. Investors called him with offers. For the first time since his mother's funeral, Daniel felt like he'd built something that couldn't be taken from him. Then it was a private dinner, a powerful businessman, a guest who fell violently ill hours after eating Daniel's food. No formal charges were ever filed. The tests came back inconclusive, the timeline never quite added up, but none of that mattered. The accusation alone was enough. Headlines don't wait for verdicts. Within a month, his reservations dried up. Within 3, his investors pulled out. His girlfriend left without much of an explanation, just a note and an empty side of the closet. The restaurant closed with his name still stapled to a lawsuit that never went anywhere and destroyed everything anyway. Governor Han had been the only one who still trusted him enough to let him into his home, cooking quiet family dinners for a fraction of what Daniel used to earn. But even that had grown strange in recent weeks. Canceled sessions, tension in the house he couldn't explain, Seo-yeon avoiding his eyes at the dinner table like she was carrying something she couldn't say out loud. Now he understood, or he thought he did. His phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A message from an unknown number, no name, no context. Just a video file, 11 seconds long. Daniel's thumb hovered over it for a long moment before he pressed play. Seo-yeon's face filled the screen, pale under fluorescent light, her wrists bound to the arms of a metal chair. Her eyes found the camera like she knew exactly who would be watching. "Chef Daniel," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to be understood. "Don't trust my father." The video ended. Daniel stood alone on the bridge, the river still moving beneath him, the city still glittering like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. 2 hours ago, he had been ready to end his life, believing it meant nothing to anyone. Now a 19-year-old girl tied to a chair somewhere in Seoul was warning him. Not the police, not her own father, him. The question wasn't just who had taken her. The question was why she trusted a broken man on a bridge more than she trusted her own blood. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his cramped apartment with the video paused on Seo-yeon's face, replaying her voice over and over until the words stopped sounding like a warning and started sounding like a plea. "Don't trust my father." By morning, the governor called again. His voice had steadied, but only in the way a man's voice steadies right before he says something he doesn't want to say. "They sent their terms," the governor said. "You go alone. No police. No security. No one from my office. If they see anyone else," they said. He stopped. He didn't need to finish. "And if I say no?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "Then my daughter dies, and it will be because you were too afraid to walk into a building." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. 3 years ago, this man had let the whole city believe he was a poisoner. 3 years ago, this man had stopped returning his calls the moment it became politically convenient. And now Daniel was supposed to walk into danger for him. "She's not my responsibility," Daniel said, and even as the words left his mouth, they tasted like a lie. Silence stretched on the line. Then the governor said something Daniel wasn't ready for. "There's a photograph." They sent it with the demands. A pause, heavy enough to bend. "It's her necklace, Daniel. The one you gave her. They want you to know they know exactly who you are to her." Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered the night he'd pressed that necklace into a grieving 15-year-old's palm, remembered telling her that her mother's love didn't disappear just because her mother had. He remembered promising, not to the governor, not to anyone watching, that he would look out for her. "Send me the address," Daniel said. The building was an abandoned restaurant on the edge of Mapo-gu, the kind of place that had died quietly years ago and never been torn down, just left to rot with its windows boarded and its sign half fallen. Daniel pushed through a door that gave way too easily, like someone had wanted him to get in without a fight. Inside, dust hung in the moonlight cutting through broken slats. Tables overturned, chairs stacked in corners like bones. Daniel moved through the dark with his phone flashlight trembling in his hand, calling her name into a silence that answered with nothing. Then he saw it. A phone, resting on the counter where a cash register used to sit. Seo-yeon's phone, the case unmistakable. A small enamel pin of a magpie she'd added months ago because her mother used to say magpies brought good news. Daniel reached for it. That's when the doors exploded open behind him. Police flooded the room in a wave of shouted commands and flashlight beams, weapons raised. Voices overlapping in a chaos Daniel couldn't process fast enough. He raised his hands on instinct, the phone still gripped in his fingers, his heart slamming against his ribs. On the ground. "Now, I didn't. I got a call. I was told to come here." Nobody was listening. Hands seized his arms, forced him down onto broken tile, cold metal closing around his wrists. Someone shouted that they'd found his fingerprints across half the building, that the tip had come in an hour ago. Anonymous, precise, exact. Someone had known Daniel would be here before Daniel had known it himself. Then came the words that turned his stomach to ice. "We've got blood on his jacket. Get forensics down here now." Daniel twisted his neck to look down at his own sleeve. And there it was, a dark stain he hadn't noticed in the dark of the restaurant, smeared just above his cuff like it had been placed there, not spilled. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't seen her. But the stain didn't care what he had or hadn't done. By morning, his face was everywhere. Governor's daughter kidnapped. Black private chef detained for questioning. The story spread faster than any correction ever could, faster than the quiet release that came 18 hours later when the department admitted they didn't have enough to charge him. Innocent, technically. Free legally. But free didn't mean anything when every stranger on the street already had their verdict. Daniel sat alone that night in his apartment, staring at the jacket the police had finally returned to him, sealed in a plastic evidence bag with a torn strip of paper reading insufficient match. Not her blood. Someone else's. He turned the jacket over in his hands, and something in the back of his mind, some old, buried instinct, began to itch. He'd seen this before. Not the jacket. The blood. The particular rust-brown shade of it, dried in that same uneven pattern. 3 years ago, the night of the poisoning scandal. A stain on a linen napkin that no one had ever properly explained. Daniel's hands went still. Someone had used the exact same method to destroy him twice. His phone buzzed on the counter. A text, no name attached, the same unknown number from the night before. You're getting close. That's dangerous for a man who almost jumped last night. Daniel stared at the screen until the words blurred, his pulse roaring in his ears. Whoever was doing this hadn't just been watching Seo-yeon. They'd been watching him. On the bridge. In the dark. In the one moment he thought no one in the world was paying attention. If a story has ever made the hair on your arms stand up, this is the moment to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me who you think is really behind this. Because Daniel is about to find out that his downfall 3 years ago and Seo-yeon's kidnapping tonight were never two separate stories at all. Daniel didn't wait for morning. He spread everything across his kitchen table. The evidence bag, the anonymous text, 3 years of memories he'd spent trying to forget. Somewhere in the wreckage of his old life was the answer to why it had happened, and somewhere in that answer was the truth about who had really taken Seo-yeon. He started with her mother. Han Ji-won had died 3 years ago, almost to the week Daniel's restaurant collapsed. A car accident on a wet mountain road outside the city, ruled an accident by every official report, mourned publicly by a governor who never once, in Daniel's memory, seemed surprised by it. But Daniel remembered something else. Something he'd buried under years of his own collapse. The night before she died, Ji-won had come to his restaurant alone, long after closing. She'd sat at the counter, refused the food he offered, and gripped his hand with a strength that had frightened him at the time. If something happens to me, she'd said, promise me you'll protect Seo-yeon. He'd thought she was tired, overwhelmed. He'd promised without understanding, the way you promise a frightened person anything just to ease their fear. He had never imagined she meant it literally. Now he understood. She'd known something was coming for her. Daniel showed up at the governor's residence before sunrise, past security that no longer stopped him now that his name meant scandal instead of trust. He found Governor Han in his study, unshaven, a glass of untouched whiskey sweating on the desk in front of him. What was your wife investigating? Daniel asked. No greeting, no patience left for one. The governor's face went pale in a way that answered the question before his mouth could catch up. I don't know what you're talking about. She warned me the night before she died. She knew something was going to happen to her. What was she looking into, Governor? Get out of my house. Your daughter is missing and someone is trying to bury me the same way they buried whatever your wife found. So no, I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth. The governor's hands trembled around the glass. For a long moment, Daniel thought he really would say nothing, that whatever wall of silence had protected this family for 3 years would hold. Then it cracked. She found evidence, the governor said, his voice barely above a whisper. Businessmen manipulating government contracts. Bribes routed through shell companies. She'd been collecting proof for months without telling me how deep it went. He set the glass down, his hand unsteady. I believe she was murdered. I never had proof. Exposing it would have destroyed everything I'd built, everything I was trying to protect for Seo-yeon's future. So I said nothing. I let the world believe it was an accident. Daniel felt something in his chest go hard and cold. You let your wife die twice, he said quietly. Once when they killed her, and again when you buried the truth instead of fighting for her. The governor didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. And in his silence, Daniel understood something worse. That whoever had killed Ji-won 3 years ago had never stopped watching this family, had simply waited, patient and unseen, until they needed leverage again. Daniel's phone rang before he could say another word. Unknown number. He answered on instinct. Chef Daniel. Seo-yeon's voice, hoarse, breathless, alive. Daniel's chest seized with relief, so sharp it nearly buckled his knees. Seo-yeon, where are you? Are you hurt? I don't have much time. Her words tumbled fast, urgent, like she was speaking with her hand cupped around the phone, terrified of being heard. I got loose for a minute. I don't know how long. Listen to me. My mother didn't trust my father. Not with this. Not with any of it. I know. He just told me what she found. No, Seo-yeon said, and something in her voice made Daniel go still. He doesn't know everything. There's more, and it's not in his files. It's somewhere he'd never think to look. Where? Tell me where you are. I'll come. The necklace, she said instead, ignoring the question entirely. The one you gave me. Chef Daniel, it isn't jewelry. The line went dead. Daniel stood frozen in the governor's study, the phone still pressed to his ear long after the call had ended, the governor watching him with a face that had aged a decade in the span of one conversation. He thought back to the necklace, the small gold pendant shaped like a magnolia, the one Ji-won herself had worn every day before she died, the one Daniel had pressed into her grieving daughter's palm without ever really looking at it closely. It isn't jewelry. His hands were shaking again, but not from grief this time. He needed to find that necklace. Tonight. Before whoever had been watching him on the bridge, whoever had planted blood on his jacket twice, whoever had been 3 steps ahead of him this entire time, realized that Seo-yeon had just told him exactly where to look. If you're starting to piece together who's really behind this, don't spoil it in the comments yet. But go ahead and like this video and subscribe, because the next part is where everything Daniel thought he understood gets turned completely upside down. Daniel found the necklace exactly where he expected, locked in the small fireproof box Seo-yeon kept in her childhood bedroom, untouched since the day her mother died. His fingers trembled as he turned it over, searching the smooth gold petals until his thumbnail caught a nearly invisible seam along the back. It clicked open. Inside was not a locket, not a photograph, but a storage chip smaller than a grain of rice. Daniel drove straight to an internet cafe on the edge of the city, plugged the device into a borrowed laptop with shaking hands, and watched 3 years of silence spill open in front of him. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, names of officials he recognized from newspapers he'd stopped reading after his own scandal buried him. And then, a video file, dated the night before Ji-won died. She was recording secretly, her camera angled from inside her handbag, capturing a private meeting in a hotel suite. 3 businessmen sat across from her, their voices low, their words damning. Then the door opened, and a 4th man entered. Choi Min-jae, the governor's most trusted aide. The man who had stood beside Daniel at every press conference during the search for Seo-yeon, offering him water, offering him sympathy, offering him nothing but lies. In the video, Choi crossed the room calmly, placed a hand on Ji-won's shoulder, and said words that made Daniel's blood run cold. He wasn't a bystander. He was the architect. And in the grainy background of that same recording, barely visible, barely audible, Daniel heard his own name spoken. A mention of the chef who'd accidentally wandered into an earlier version of this exact meeting 18 months before it happened. A loose end that needed tidying before it became a liability. Daniel hadn't been unlucky 3 years ago. He'd been erased. His phone rang. The governor, panic bleeding through every word. Choi is here. He says he knows where Seo-yeon is. Daniel, what is happening? Before Daniel could answer, another voice took the phone. Calm. Familiar. Almost gentle. Chef Daniel, Choi said. You always did notice too much. The line went dead. Daniel didn't need directions anymore. Seo-yeon's message replayed in his mind. A half-remembered mention of an old warehouse near the harbor where her mother used to take her as a child, before everything fell apart. He drove there with his chest hollowed out by fear and fury in equal measure. He found her tied to a chair in the corner of a food processing warehouse gone to rust, her eyes widening with disbelief when she saw him in the doorway. He crossed the room and cut her free with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, whispering that it was over, that they were leaving. Then the light snapped on. Choi stood in the doorway, unhurried, almost amused. You were supposed to die on that bridge, he said. It would have been so much cleaner. That's the problem with people like you, Daniel answered. pulling Seo-yeon behind him. You think broken people have nothing left to lose? Choi's smile faltered. Just slightly, just enough. He didn't know that Daniel had already copied everything from that chip onto 3 separate drives hours ago, sent quietly to 2 journalists and a prosecutor who'd once tried and failed to reopen Ji-won's case. He didn't know that his own voice, calm and damning, was already circulating beyond his control. Sirens rose in the distance, faint at first, then closer. Choi's composure cracked into something uglier as realization dawned. He hadn't won. He'd confessed to a dead woman's daughter and a man he'd spent 3 years trying to destroy, and now the whole city was about to hear it. He was arrested within the hour, the scandal breaking wide open by morning. Corruption, cover-up, murder, all of it unraveling under a governor forced to admit, publicly and painfully, how much he'd sacrificed to protect his own career instead of his wife's memory. It was a truth that cleared Daniel's name completely, but not one that made the governor a villain either. Just a frightened man who had chosen silence over justice and would carry that choice for the rest of his life. Daniel didn't ask him for anything. When the governor later offered money, gratitude dressed up as an apology, Daniel shook his head. "I didn't save her because you're the governor," he said, looking instead at Seo-yeon. "I saved her because her mother once asked me to." She hugged him, and for the first time in 3 years, Daniel let himself break down in front of someone else. Months later, his restaurant reopened in a smaller space in Itaewon. The same smoked short-rib doenjang on the menu. The same stubborn belief that 2 histories could share 1 plate. It was packed the night Seo-yeon walked in and set a small envelope on the counter. An old photograph of Daniel and her mother, laughing over a stove, with 4 handwritten words on the back. "Thank you for staying." Daniel looked at those words for a long time. Then he looked around at the restaurant full of strangers who had no idea how close he'd once come to never seeing this moment at all. If this story moved you even a little, that's exactly why we tell them. So drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Hit that like button and subscribe to Afro Korean Story House channel if you want more stories like Daniel's. We'll see you in the next one.